For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Visit us online at faith.yale.edu.
What Kendrick does in Damn is he pulls it out from his experience growing up in Compton in South Central LA, in this place of violence, what he refers to sometimes as a mad city, where there's so much that has gone on because of the environment that people have gone through. He shows the ills of that environment by showing it in himself. But throughout the album, what you start to discover is that Kendrick depicts himself as a prophet. And as he's depicting the evil inside himself, what he eventually reveals is that he is just a mirror for America. That everything that he is saying and doing and showing about his struggles between pride and humility, between lust and love, and this desire to try to reach for and achieve and search for sex, money, and murder is how he describes it. That is something that is core to the hip hop and the environment that Kendrick grew up in, but is actually a mirror of something that is much larger and a spiritual set of thoughts and emotions in America. And when Kendrick starts playing the Super Bowl and everyone starts coming out in red, white, and blue, and, even before that, Samuel Jackson comes, he says, "I'm your Uncle Sam," this personification of America, that there's this larger commentary about Kendrick being this mirror for the tendencies and for the thoughts and emotions that are generally shared through the media, through the economic system, through the governmental system of America.
This is For the Life of the World, a podcast about seeking and living a life worthy of our humanity. I'm Evan Rosa with the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. Super Bowl 59 was amazing, but not because of the football or the commercials. It was that 13-minute halftime tour de force that Kendrick Lamar offered the world. Uncle Sam, Samuel L. Jackson, introduces the show.
Salutations! It's your Uncle Sam, and this is the Great American Game.
This, quote, Great American Game. A PlayStation controller appears. Is the game football? A video game? Some other game entirely? Kendrick appears, crouched on a car.
My Gemini twin back powering up. No more handshakes and hugs. The energy only circulate through us. Everybody must be judged. But this time, God only favoring us. 20 years.
Dozens of red, white, and blue dancers emerge, evoking both the American flag, which they eventually form, as well as the gang wars between Bloods and Crips. Or as Kendrick says in his song, Hood Politics, Democrips and Republicans.
Ain't nothing new but a fluid new Democrips and Republicans. Red state versus a blue state. Which one you governing? They give us.
And what ensues is an intricately choreographed set of layered meanings, allusions, hidden references and Easter eggs to both his own songs and other cultural iconography, not all of which have been noticed, by the way, not to mention explained or understood. Why Samuel L. Jackson? Is it because he plays the Uncle Tom figure in Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained? Tennis star Serena Williams appears, doing the Sea Walk or Crip Walk, dressed in blue, a callback to her 2012 Crip Walk at the London Olympics, for which she got raked over the coals for, quote, glorifying gang culture. Or what about those figures leisurely draped over streetlights? A literal reference both to the way that Kendrick introduced his clothing brand, PG Lang, as well as a reference to the video of All Right, which became the anthem of the Black Lives Matter movement. In that video, Kendrick is depicted as having been shot down from a streetlight, murdered by a police officer.
Dark nights in my prayers.
These are just a few of the references. I could go on. Kendrick's music, as well as so much other rap today, is soaked in double, triple entendre and more. So much so that you couldn't possibly pick up on all of it by leisurely kicking back and watching the Super Bowl halftime show. It demanded so much more of us. You can find links to the Super Bowl halftime performance as well as all of the lyrics from it in the show notes today. This episode is an introduction to the political theology of Kendrick Lamar. And joining me is Femi Olutade, arguably the living expert on the theology of Kendrick Lamar. As a lifelong fan of hip-hop, he's deeply familiar not just with the music Kendrick made, but the influences that made Kendrick. Femi has written incredibly nuanced theological, musicological reflections about Kendrick's 2017 album, Damn, which won the Pulitzer Prize for music. And I became familiar with Femi's work in 2021 while listening to a podcast called Dissect, which analyzes albums line by line, note by note. They cover mostly rap, hip-hop, and R&B, but the season on Radiohead's In Rainbows is just as good. Femi joined host Cole Kushner to co-write a 20-episode analysis of Damn, offering incredible insight into the theological, moral, and political richness of Kendrick's album, which repays so many replays, forward and backward.
We're gonna put it in reverse!
Yes, you can play the album backwards and forwards like a mirror, and they tell two different stories. One about wickedness and pride, and the other about weakness, love, and humility.
So I was taking a walk the other day.
Now, if you want to jump into my conversation with Femi about Kendrick Lamar's political theology, please do. Just jump ahead a few minutes. But I wanted to offer a few preliminaries of my own to help with this most recent context of the Super Bowl halftime performance. Because almost immediately, it was interpreted as nothing more than one of the pettiest, most egotistical, most overkill ways to settle a rap beef between Kendrick and another hip-hop artist, Drake. You see, one way of looking at hip-hop is that it's an endless debate between who's the greatest. Now, some fans celebrated this interpretation. Others found it at best irrelevant, confusing, and at worst, a very offensive waste of an opportunity to make a larger statement before an audience of 133 million viewers. But in my humble opinion, both get it wrong. Kendrick Lamar simply does not work this way. If it was the biggest diss track of all time, it wasn't aimed merely at Drake, but America. And if it was offensive, it was because of its moral clarity and force to a divided nation, striking a prophetic chord operating similar to a parable. Parables, according to Jesus, are meant to give more to those who already have and take away from those who already have nothing. That's from Matthew 13. Because, as the prophet Isaiah says, seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. Now, at this point, it's possible that you're confused. I don't want to lose you. Rather, I'd invite you to hang with me and lean in. Watch the show again. Listen more closely, because rap, according to Jay-Z, is a lean-in genre, a lean-in experience. You can't understand it without close examination, without contextual, bottom-up, historical appreciation. You can't understand it without a willingness to be educated about what it's like to be Black in America. You can't understand it in entertainment mode. You can only understand it when your mind is switched on. But I guarantee you that in Kendrick Lamar's outstanding choreographed prophetic theater, there's so much more going on. There's levels to it. You and I know.
It's levels to it. You and I know. Tell them be humble. Sit down. Be humble.
And if you want those levels to be clearly spelled out for you, a cleaner, smoother, tighter, more palatable, less subtle social commentary that can be abstracted from history, circumstance, and the genre of rap itself so that it can be rationally evaluated, well, you're occupying the exact position Kendrick is critiquing, which he predicts in the very performance itself. As he warns us,
The revolution about to be televised. You picked the right time, but the wrong guy.
and as Uncle Samuel L. Jackson points out,
No, 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 no! Too loud, too reckless, too ghetto. Mr. Lamar, do you really know how to play the game? Then tighten up!
we're not going to like the performance unless you give us the hits, unless you give us the softer, smoother songs that the female vocal counterpoint SZA provides. In the easier listening songs from the middle of the set, Luther and All the Stars.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's what America wants. Nice and calm. You almost there.
Still, what was that? What were those 13 minutes? Well, far from a wasted opportunity, it was public performance art of the highest caliber. So you just let it land.
Oh, no. It's a cultural divide. I'm going to get it on the floor.
It's easily the greatest halftime show in the history of halftime shows.
You really about to do it? 40 acres in the mule. This is bigger than the music.
So watch it again. Notice something new.
Yeah, they tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence.
Submit yourself to it. Let it change you. And if you really want to understand it, you need to be open to the possibility that some social commentary can only be understood in light of certain lived experiences. In this case, at least for me, as a white man, I need to learn about the Black American experience. And then rather than demanding that Kendrick explain it to me in my own vernacular, I just would need to listen to what he's already said. Lean in and listen to his whole body of work, learn his story, expertly rendered in these jaw-dropping lyrical performances. And just the sickest beats. I could live with him in that Section 80 housing.
Fancy girls on Long Beach Boulevard.
Drive with him through his childhood streets of Compton on Good Kid, Mad City.
One day you respect the good kid, Mad City. Mass hallucination, baby.
Resist the tempting forces of both Uncle Sam and Lucifer on his journey from caterpillar to butterfly in To Pimp a Butterfly.
I didn't want to self-destruct. The evils of Lucy was all around me. So I went running for answers.
I could look in the mirror he holds up. America's reflection of me, that's what a mirror does, as he says in his Pulitzer Prize winning Damn.
America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does.
It's not a place.
I could hear out his messy psyche laid totally bare in Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers.
I've been going through something.
I hope you find some peace of mind in this lifetime.
And I could join him for a ride in his latest album, named after a car, the GNX.
Don't take it personal. You won't be the first to know. Just like
In the days following Kendrick's Super Bowl performance, J. Cameron Carter, a professor of African American Studies and Comparative Literature and Religion at the University of California, Irvine, he called for a more in-depth study of this 13-minute performance, noting that, quote, Black performance carries within it an interrogation of the question of country as the problem and question of U.S. political theology and the legacy of Christian empire. So if you didn't already know about the spiritual clarity and theological richness of Kendrick Lamar and his music, I hope this episode presents an opportunity for you to dive in. It isn't meant to close any books or offer a full explanation of Kendrick's performance, let alone his music, but just to lean in a little bit more. And to quote Kendrick, salute the truth and the prophecy.
Salute the truth and the prophecy. I got loyalty, got royalty.
So thanks for leaning in with me and Femi Olutade. Hope you enjoy. Femi, thank you so much for joining me on For the Life of the World.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here and chatting about Kendrick and spirituality and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to confess, I've been familiar with you because of your appearance on the podcast Dissect. And when you came on to essentially what seemed to be a co-production or co-writing of that whole season on Kendrick Lamar's album Damn, it was kind of a life-changing moment for me and meant a lot to me to be going through something as rich and deep as that album. I think for a lot of people that listened to the album, it was one of those, and this will be a theme for our conversation, I think, it was one of those scenarios where there was like a slow unfolding or revelation of what was actually happening in the album. And that's just part of what it is to engage Kendrick's music. Femi, how did you find yourself working on that season of Dissect and becoming this kind of expert on the theology of Kendrick Lamar?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's certain long-term things, just like a longer spiritual upbringing. I was raised in an evangelical, charismatic background. My parents were immigrants from Nigeria. And really, throughout our time growing up, and we grew up in America, it was really our Christian tradition which is what we knew that was really the foundation of how our parents raised us, even more than the American side of things, even more than the Nigerian cultural side. It was really spirituality. And we had Bible studies every single evening. We went to church 4 times a week. So I think a part of the start is just growing up being raised by my parents who were just very committed to their faith and very committed to Jesus. And that was how, as growing up, I learned to see the whole world. So there's that. There's me, myself being, because like I said, my parents are immigrants from Nigeria and Black. And so growing up in America where you're Black, but also you have this identity that is outside of the African-American identity. There's a whole journey in understanding what it means to be Black in America, where you're not from the descendants of those that came here enslaved and don't maybe have the historical history of your parents going through the civil rights movement and like the 1970s. My parents and a lot of other Nigerians came here in the 80s. So it's like a just different like background. And so for me, when I got to be a teenager, hip hop was a thing that for me, I discovered maybe later than other people that might have had their parents playing it when they were growing up. Like my parents were not playing hip hop music when I was growing up. So for me, I heard it more so and got into it and found things like particularly Tupac was really the first one that I got into when I was maybe like 14 or so. And so it was really my introduction to a lot of American Black culture, a lot of African American culture was listening to hip hop. And I think just the way in which it wrestled, at least the artists that I listened to, a lot with just issues of social justice, issues of right and wrong, issues of pain and suffering and looking for healing in God in the midst of a lot of going on was a lot of why I really gravitated and got so much out of hip hop. And so from that, I listened to hip hop for years and years, before Kendrick came out. And it's maybe 2010, 2011 when I really heard Kendrick for the first time. And I have an ear from listening to hip hop when someone is saying something that was in the mainstream hip hop, but then had this moral, spiritual clarity that was uncommon right before Good Kid, Mad City, which is his first major album, as I really started paying attention. And then when that album and subsequent albums came out, I just saw the continual growth and this density of ideas, which is very rare at the kind of spiritual clarity often that you see in his work. And so I think fast forward, it was that through Damn, which was 2017 that came out. And so when that came out, I think I had listened to so many things. And at that point, I had a kid. He was a year old at the time, my son. And so there was this, and I was going through my own spiritual journey because I also was journeying from growing up in the evangelical Protestant charismatic tradition into where I'm now, which is an Eastern Orthodox tradition. And so in that exact time period where that album came out, I was also in this kind of journey period where I was just reading a lot. I was like listening to a lot of things, a lot of the Bible Project kind of podcasts and really reframe understanding the Bible in a way that even though I'd read it so much growing up, there was all these layers that I realized that I had never understood or I'd been missed or didn't even know was there to look for, like the first, 20, almost 30 years of my life. And so as along with that and reading stuff that album came out and like really made me think of it. And so I just wanted to write and put that together because I really felt that album was one where if you weren't really looking for some of this stuff or weren't really listening or didn't have the background, that it people weren't going to recognize it. And particularly at this point, Kendrick was, one of, if not the biggest rapper, particularly for people that are really looking for like rhymes and complexity and layers. He was at the top of the game as far as he'd gotten to that point already. And so I thought it was important to try to write some kind of blog or something so people could understand it if they didn't have the background. And essentially I heard about Dissect through some other friend. I emailed Cole, who's the host of Dissect, and this was actually just the first season. It was just after he did a season on Spit Butterfly.
That's right.
The first season.
Yes.
I emailed him. So it was still smaller at the time. And he's like, oh, that's cool. Like I'll read through your blog. And then essentially that was kind of it. And then basically a little while later, it's 2018. And then he was looking for someone to write the 5th season, which was going to be on Damn by Kendrick Lamar. And so he said, hey, I read your blog post. Like you clearly know a lot about this stuff. And I didn't grow up in a Christian background. I don't have this background at all. So I'd love to have a co-writer for the first time or like really a writer for this particular episode. And I just want you to take a lot of your knowledge, basically learn how to write in the Dissect format, which is this line by line format, inserting the right kind of references in all these different ways. And so basically I was brought up as a lead writer for that season. So like for the whole, there's 20 scripted episodes. Cole he's really good at music and production, and he hears that kind of first. So any parts of the music production Notes are things that he wrote that season. And then everything else is what I wrote. So it's the majority is like 95% of it is what I wrote.
The lyrical substance is all you.
Yeah, all of that. It was little stuff I wrote and stuff. So, and I learned a lot doing it. I learned how to communicate. I learned a lot from Cole in terms of how he had built his audience, how he communicated. And he had been somebody that really was wanting to learn about Jesus and Christianity and what Kendrick was saying spiritually, but maybe he didn't have the background, but was actually very open and very humble person that was really willing to listen and has a really good heart. And so I learned a lot about how to communicate through writing that season and realizing, oh, this is where people are at. This is what people understand, what they don't understand. And here's how you can bridge the gap. And so I helped to craft the skill of like how to take these things from the Bible, from Kendrick, from hip hop, from Black experience, from all of this stuff, and be able to help to make it easily accessible to people who didn't grow up in that background. So that's a lot of what I learned and try to do a lot in that season and in any other things that I've done, either on Dissect or other things, including this interview. Hopefully that also does that here as well too.
Oh, I'm excited. The spiritual clarity point, I think, is really fascinating, really interesting. And we're going to keep it through the lens of Kendrick. But I will say, at least generally, when we're talking about music and other art forms and thinking about the sort of purpose of art, and I would say the public purpose of art, I want to foreground it with a little bit of that, because this is, I think, at the sort of hermeneutical heart of what happened last Sunday night during the Super Bowl, which is a giant community. It was like 133 million or something that was tuned in. And I mean, arguably because of Kendrick, and certainly by the halftime, it was game over for the Eagles. They had already won the game practically. To turn that into this public performance art, it was so much more than a concert. Felt like a kind of combination concert, album drop, reinterpretation, performative, choreographed, I think, multi-layered message. And then to think about the way that, you know, insofar as like the hermeneutical element is about like this exchange between an author and an audience. It's amazing. This is a fascinating thing that Kendrick has done on a very, very public stage where there's this very profound, I think, example of how art shapes and is constitutive of human culture.
Yeah, as far as art and what it does and what its purpose and what does it mean to be a true artist, I think there's definitely a lot in there from hermeneutics and from a spiritual perspective. But you see a lot in Kendrick's work. And also if you even look at, you know, how St. Paul and how he talks to the kind of Greeks in Athens and other places, there is definitely the sense of art being part of a prophetic mode of communication, of taking ideas that exist in the spiritual realm and communicating in a ways that really sticks with people and allows people to be immersed in a certain set of thoughts and emotions.
Yeah. You can go back into the Old Testament too.
Exactly. It's very much too. Yeah. Paul crystallized it by and why I like the Paul's point is because he talks about, even as some of your prophets have said, this idea that people, even outside of Israel, outside of the people of God, have these prophets that are speaking through poetry and like art, that is like an essential way in which the spiritual realm, however you engage in that, exists. And then, as you mentioned, going back into the Old Testament, you know, the prophets that were in the Old Testament are often speaking in poetry and bringing art and this way in which you have to meditate and work at it. And so I do think art, why is art different than what we're doing now as far as discussing or analyzing it and other things, is that art definitely leaves these gaps that are there. Like poetry in particular, it's built off having gaps, and you have to work and digest and put things together. So it allows for this multifaceted set of connections that really can break you out from how you currently think in your own set of connection into these new world of kind of connections. And whether that be poetry, whether that be hip hop, whether that be fashion, you know, within the Orthodox tradition, iconography is one of the central things of things that are a way of making holy, set apart art that communicates story, communicates truth, communicates something, but it's not video camera footage. It's not a documentary. It's communicating these much larger, bigger ideas that when you look at it over time, when you pray in front of it over time, when you ponder, when you look for the details, that process is what transforms your thoughts and emotions and gives you these new sets of them. So,
and I think does work in the prophetic mode. And I do want to think about the sort of choreographed nature, because I think that's an important part of this Kendrick performance. But to understand Kendrick as prophet, occupying a prophetic space as he has for so long, I come back to sort of the bizarre movements of Ezekiel, say, where God is having Ezekiel do incredibly strange things, or maybe seemingly irrelevant things, lying down on his side for 40 days, or doing something with a brick, pretending it's Jerusalem, things that would have confused the audience as well. And I think sort of counterpoint to the relevancy of Paul, say, this is maybe more in line with the prophetic mode of Jesus, where the parables are mysterious for a reason, and they're cryptic, and they have a way of acting as a lightning rod, being a mode of presenting the truth that is meant for a particular mode of reception, I think. And I think that's part of what was going on in that halftime show. Is it was hard to receive. It was just hard to understand, and a lot of people just completely missed the point.
Yeah, that is true. And I think people in the hip hop community talk about this a lot, about hip hop as a form of it being something. Jay-Z described it as like lean forward media in his kind of biography that he wrote. And he distinguished between media that is lean back media and lean forward media, that a lot of, whether pop music or, blockbuster movies, is this lean back. It doesn't require you to think very much. It follows your own expectations. Things just run smoothly. And you just kind of watch. You don't have to think. You don't have to really engage. You can just lean back and just kind of veg out about it. But what Jay-Z described hip hop as something that is lean forward media, that it requires you to take a position. It always started in battling and thoughts, and you have to do this extra work, and you have to take a position, and you have to think about what you think and feel about it, because it's not presented just like right for you so directly. And so when you take Jay-Z's definition of hip hop as a lean forward media, that's definitely what is going on with Kendrick's performance, because how somebody would experience that as someone that comes not from being in hip hop, not from knowing or listening to it before, or even if you're at the surface where you heard it just in passing, or like in a commercial somewhere, or like in some venue or a club or something, but haven't really sat with it and understood where it come from and when it came from, then there's a lot of things that would be lost on why is the performance like this, and what is it even saying or doing. But for someone, if you really pay attention to hip hop, and particularly paid attention to Kendrick's work as someone who's been at the top of hip hop artistry for the last decade, you're experiencing it differently than other people. I know that there were some points where I was kind of like, oh wow, he did that. Oh wow, he did that. And you can experience that in real time. But if you haven't done that work, and it is work to do, even if you have to really listen and think, and sometimes look up lyrics, and sometimes understand where it's come from. So you have to listen to other things that came before what is being performed. So there's a lot of work that kind of goes into it. So yeah, there is definitely that. That's what I'll highlight for this performance. There's definitely a lot of work, and I think the reason it was that way, he chose intentionally to do that, to do a performance that is a piece of art, that is something that people have to do the work to understand, maybe to research, to listen, and to really unfold the ideas. And those who've already done the work up to that point, you have experience where maybe in real time you're getting more of it and can both enjoy it and then are picking things up. But then even as it goes forward, there's more to pick up. And I think that's often what makes really transformative art, and what's often distinguishes a lot of Kendrick's work.
And maybe we can do a little bit of dissection in a moment for the Super Bowl performance, because yes, the Super Bowl performance was an important message, I think, and just a sight to behold. But Kendrick's broader work, I think, is just so fascinating and really repays a close look. That leaning into Kendrick, for me, goes even deeper than the average hip hop artist. And it does come back to spiritual clarity for me. It's uncommon to find a musician with this sort of synthetic ability to draw so much together into what is essentially a musical, lyrical masterpiece that is also celebrated in pop culture as, well, can win Grammys and Pulitzer Prizes. What are the key components to understanding the spiritual clarity of Kendrick Lamar?
A great question. How can you really understand and appreciate the spiritual clarity? How does that unfold in maybe some of his other work, including Damn? Where does that come from? A lot of hip hop often deals with the hard reality of life because it comes from the African American experience, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century in kind of low income urban environments post the civil rights movement, where you really see the weight and the evils and the challenges of past oppression, of a lack of leadership, of a lack of fathers, of drugs, of crime, of all these kind of things in these communities, particularly in New York and Los Angeles, where the music came out of. And when you grow up in that environment, you can make music about it that's talking about what is going on there and glorifying it, or just living somewhat blindly to it because now you're at the top of the artistic success, or one can just enjoy the parties and the drinks and the drugs, and one just talks and raps about that and just enjoys it. And that's like the stage where there's a lack of clarity. Where the clarity often comes in is when one's lived through that and one's gone through everything, including oneself, but also seeing the effects on people's lives, on friends, on addictions that you've seen in family members or friends, on deaths, whether that be gang violence or addictions, with loss of relationships, breakdown of family and order, other things like that. I think when people are able to go through that, talk about those experiences, but also talk about what happens depending on how people make choice in their lives, and this need to be transformed. And in some ways, because it's going on in such a critical environment where things can be life or death, often the way in more comfortable parts of America, would that be more mainstream, more suburban, more middle class, you can think, or you can think the right way or think the wrong way, but you might not end up like getting murdered or murdering somebody. But in a place where life is just on a knife's edge, how you think will like very readily produce certain fruit one way or the other. And I think that's where you see a lot of that in Damn. And that's where it comes out of the idea of wickedness or weakness, which I've interpreted as being this choice, which seems odd. Nobody really wants to be weak and no one wants to be wicked. But what I interpret it as saying is a lot of what Jesus said and what Paul writes about in Corinthians, of this idea that when we are weak, then we are strong because the power of Christ rests in us. And it is through weakness that people enter into the kingdom of God. And that is the opposite of wickedness, which seeks to have strength, which seeks to domineer, which seeks to use that strength for violence and power to both satisfy one's own desires and to be able to keep anyone from challenging what one wants to hold on to. And so that's a lot of how I interpreted a lot of the Kendrick's words throughout Damn. And it's a recurring motif between wickedness and weakness that goes throughout the whole thing. Also between then pride and love becomes also another one that comes out later, and love and lust. And so there's all these mirrored things that the whole album is actually structured like a chiasm, like a lot of the Psalm, like Psalm 67. I've argued that it's really chiastic in the sense of the first and the last track kind of mirror each other. The middle two tracks are pride and humble, are the middle two tracks. And they're mirroring each other and commenting on each other. And the song Pride, Kendrick actually being very humble. And in the song Humble, Kendrick's actually being very proud. And there's all this like twisting around what's going on. And Humble was one of the tracks that Kendrick performed at the Super Bowl. So all of that is there. And there's all this commentary about how one's choices we're going to have good fruit or bad fruit. And that's going to be seen through one's life. And what Kendrick does in Damn is he pulls it out from his experience growing up in Compton and South Central LA, this place of violence, what he refers to as a mad city, where there's so much that has gone on because of the environment that people have gone through. And he shows the ills of that environment and by showing it in himself. But throughout the album, what you start to discover is that Kendrick depicts himself as a prophet. And this is almost like one of these sign acts from Ezekiel that you're talking about. And as he's depicting the evil inside himself, what he eventually reveals, particularly there's a song called XXX, which on the latter half of the album, what he reveals there is that he is just a mirror for America. That everything that he is saying and doing and showing about his struggles between pride and humility, between lust and love, and this desire to try to reach for and achieve and search for like money, power, and sex, money, and murder is how he describes it. And that is something that is it's in DNA, which is also one of the songs that he performed, that is something that is core to the hip hop and the environment that Kendrick grew up in, but is actually a mirror of something that is much larger and a spiritual set of thoughts and emotions in America. And that's very clear in Damn when you look at something like DNA, when you look at Humble, when you look at particularly XXX. And that often influences, even if I just tease that for you and you can't get into all of it, when Kendrick starts playing the Super Bowl and everyone starts coming out in red, white, and blue, and that's the whole color palette, and even before that, Samuel L. Jackson comes, he says, "I'm your Uncle Sam." Again, he's Samuel L. Jackson dressed up as Uncle Sam, this personification of America, that there's this larger commentary about Kendrick being this mirror for the tendencies and for the thoughts and emotions that are generally shared through the media, through the economic system, through the governmental system of America.
What's so fascinating about the concept of being a mirror, and this is a direct line from, I'm going to forget what song, that's what a mirror does. America's reflections of me, that's what a mirror does. That's
the end of XXX. That's how XXX ends. Yeah. America's reflection of me. That's what a mirror does. Yeah.
And of course, like the way he raps it, it sounds like America. It's almost rhymes with America. Amera does, and it's good. It's good lyrically, of course, but it becomes, I think, a hermeneutical device for understanding a lot of what he's trying to do. And you already mentioned a few of the ways that it's just, if you knew that this was a component of what Kendrick regularly is investing in his lyrics, then you'd be looking out for it in a different way. And I mean, but it is blatant. It's coming out in red, white, and blue, eventually forming an American flag. And so I think we're in a good spot to dive in a little bit more on what's going on here. And you brought up Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam is a personification of America, but Kendrick uses Uncle Sam alongside Lucifer in To Pimp a Butterfly as the two antagonists. Well, maybe two of three. I mean, he's also himself as an antagonist in To Pimp a Butterfly. But I'm curious if you can help set the context, because I think we need to understand the role of Samuel L. Jackson in this, playing roles in, for instance, Django Unchained as a kind of quote Uncle Tom figure. There's that element going on as well. The choice of Samuel L. Jackson for that role is multi-layered in and of itself. In To Pimp a Butterfly, what would you say is the role that Uncle Sam is playing that would help us understand the role of Samuel L. Jackson in the Super Bowl halftime show?
Yeah, so to answer that directly, I would say, in short, you already alluded to that there is this mirrored nature also in To the Butterfly, or like a multi-spiritual layer where you see one thing and then there's another thing that's deeper, that's a spiritual reality underneath it. And in To the Butterfly, Uncle Sam is the front for a deeper spirituality that's related to Lucy, who's short for Lucifer, which is the devil or Satan, the diabolical false accuser or shining one, who also shows up in the recent album GNX. And so it's representation of pride and strength and control and all these other things. But Uncle Sam is mentioned, or Kendrick raps from the perspective of Uncle Sam on a song called Wesley's Theory, which is the first track on the album To the Butterfly, 2015. And on that, Uncle Sam is like, what do you want? A house or a call, 40 acres and a mule, a piano, a guitar. And he's like, you can live at the mall. So Uncle Sam first represents a lot of commercialism, being able to give you the material and commercial success and possessions, mammon, wealth that you really want. And Uncle Sam being this vehicle, almost, like Satan in the wilderness tempting Jesus, where he's, oh, I have control over all the kingdoms of the world and I can give you all of it. Mm-hmm. There's that kind of thing of offering to satisfy the material desires. But at the same time, what you find is that what's going on with Uncle Sam is actually trapping Kendrick and people like Kendrick.
Yeah.
Just like Lucifer is trying to trap people. And Uncle Sam does that by getting them to buy these things by using their money in a ways where eventually Uncle Sam could come after them through the IRS and get them for tax evasion.
Right.
Which is what happened to Wesley Snipes, which is why it's called Wesley's theory.
Right.
And so there is this kind of diabolical, devious thing going on where it's actually a trap because it's an adversarial relationship. And Uncle Sam seems like what Uncle Sam is doing is for the benefit of Kendrick to satisfy the needs. But there's actually this adversarial relationship that's going on that's about power and competition and Uncle Sam being the winner at the end of the day.
Yeah. But the 40 acres and a mule element is really important, not just for Wesley's theory. It comes up. I mean, Kendrick recites it again. He refers to 40 acres and a mule in the Super Bowl halftime show.
He does. Yeah.
Let me find the line. He says,
it's right before Not Like Us.
It's a cultural divide. I mean, get it on the floor. 40 acres and a mule. This is bigger than the music. They tried to rig the game, but you can't fake influence. And this is it's like it's another interpretive code, I think, for how we should understand that performance itself. But I mean, I'll let you maybe explain the 40 acres and a mule reference, but it's a historical reference. It comes from the special field orders given by Union General William T. Sherman during the Civil War.
Yes.
That is about livelihood and ownership of something, but a kind of half-hearted, in a way, almost demeaning effort on the part of Uncle Sam to try to develop a livelihood for Black families in the Jim Crow era.
Yeah, exactly. So it is after the Civil War, after the slaves are freed, there was this promise that each Black family would receive 40 acres and a mule. 40 acres being important because at the time in the 1800s, agriculture was the main form of the economy. And so having land meant that you had economic stability and potential and can farm on the land and be able to produce and take care of oneself and one's family and people. And a mule, of course, at the time before a lot of the mechanization of the agricultural world, you needed a mule to do farm labor and things. So it was this promise that there would be what would be referred to as reparations of payback for the years of slavery and the injustice done against Black people. And long story short, this never actually happened. People did not get, every family did not get 40 acres and a mule. I don't even know if really any substantial amount of people got anything like that. So it's a false promise. And it's just this idea that there has not been restitution, there has not been reconciliation and payback for the debt of what it took for the burden placed on Black people as the country was in its infancy and for almost 100 years afterwards, as far as it being built up. So a lot of that is in there. And again, it goes to this adversarial relationship with Uncle Sam, these false promises, what's promised, but is never actually really received. And even what is actually, whatever it seems like there is something that is positive received, there's these strings attached to it that then become the same string or maybe even the rope that, people are hanged by or enslaved, they're re-enslaved by or imprisoned by.
And I think this is where, to round out the Uncle Sam element, to develop it in the context of the great American game, right? That's what is introduced at the very beginning of the performance, said by Samuel L. Jackson, the great American game. And this game, Kendrick informs us, is a rigged game. And what some commentators are already pointing out is that this great American game is really run by white owners and Black athletes. And it is a kind of, you wonder about the way that there's a kind of exploitation that might be happening there. Fascinating to me was there's a moment when Kendrick is surrounded by a bunch of other guys, and they're all representative of West Coast Compton style hip hop. They're just in jeans and a t-shirt. They've got grills, and they're joyfully enjoying this moment. There's 11 of them, and they're underneath that street lamp, which is also another Kendrick reference, both to All Right and to his company, PG Lang. But the fact that there's 11 of them and that that's the number of football players on a team. Kendrick is the coach. He's the 12th member. But then you also have 12 disciples. I don't know. There's fascinating numerology that's going on here. What I'm trying to point out is the racial element of the Super Bowl halftime show and how Kendrick has historically treated this theme and has been blasted from every direction about it.
Yeah, that is very true. So, I mean, you said a lot of things that it goes so deep in terms of how the performance is offering commentary and on different levels. So both, I said, as far as it being America's game and, as you point out, race are two things that have, I think, several layers in it. So again, the first most obvious layer is that America's game is often like a title referred to for American football. It's even distinguished from what we call soccer in America by the word American. It's American football. It doesn't get more than that. When to describe this sport, you have to say American in front of it. And so this idea of America's game being the Super Bowl, that's what it seems to be introducing. But then there's what you find is that the whole design of it is thematically the most unifying concept is the idea of a competitive game in the entire performance. Everything is centered around that. So you see that in it's beginning with a PlayStation, like the square, X, circle, and triangle buttons, which come from a PlayStation. Again, playing a game, playing in that case, a video game. There's like in the back, if you look in the crowd, there's lights from the crowd that show like loading, and it's like a percentage loading as if it's loading a video game. And then before he starts, it says there's some text that says again with the lights, it says start here and has an arrow pointing to the square where Kendrick starts the performance. So there's all this thing about a game and being played. So the football game, the video game, all this kind of game terminology, this competitive game. And again, it's a PlayStation. The word play is in there. And even that concept of play comes all the way back to things that Kendrick has said earlier, most notably within 2024 on Euphoria, which was the first track that Kendrick released to discrediting Drake as the person that was in this competition, this game about who's the best rapper, that Kendrick said, have you ever played? Have you ever, okay, N-word, let's play. Have you ever walked your enemy down like with a poker face? And so that when he says play everything around PlayStation, have you ever played this game? It's all tied together. And from when Kendrick talked about it in interviews where his mindset's at about the performance and things, one of the key words he brought up was competition. And he just everything's about competition. And hip hop is a competitive sport. It's a competitive exercise. For those that haven't listened to hip hop extensively, the best way to describe it, it's like a debate. It's a debate competition. And the topic is always, why am I the best? And that's the debate. Why am I better than you? That's the topic of every single hip hop, performance. It's a battle that it goes, I am better than you for these reasons, right?
Yeah.
And the reasons, you can categorize them, come down to, I can categorize them in three, which is I'm the best because I have the most commercial or material success. That's one. Two, I'm the best because I have the best artistry in terms of how I say that I put things in a way that you've never thought of them before. They're this artistry component. And the third thing is I'm the best because I have the highest integrity. For however you define what creates integrity. And those are often what hip hop battle. You can take almost everything that's said, everything's a debate over those kind of categories.
Now you start with the sex, money, power thing.
Sex, money, power thing. So
or the way Kendrick says it, sex, money, murder.
Sex, money, murder. Yeah, exactly. So because being able to do that, be able to get people out means I can buy the guns. It means I can pay off the people to do the shooting. It means I can control the courts. All that is in this really corrupted version of what it means to have economic material success. So all of that is roped into that. And all that, again, is a mirror towards America in a lot of ways of what's being said in there. And then there's this artistry. What makes good art? Is hip hop good art? And a lot of what Uncle Sam says later is, oh, that's what America wants whenever SZA is singing. What is beauty? What is artwork? What can we appreciate? And then going down to integrity. of what is a flag represent? What is the values of America? What are the values of Kendrick? What are the values of those that are opposed to Kendrick? So all of that is there. And then even within those three things, I would also say there's three layers of where the game is, where the competition is. The top one is like race in America and this competitive landscape that we already talked about with Uncle Sam and this adversarial relationship. Beneath that, as we've also alluded to, is this competition within hip hop. As I mentioned, hip hop is a competitive enterprise, it's a competitive sport. It's a debate that there is always, and Kendrick's talked about this, like for him, hip hop always comes down to competition. And like I said, it's a debate of like, why am I, or why are me and my people better than you? There's a hip hop competition. And beneath that, within 2024, there was the very specific competition between Kendrick and Drake, which certain people that have heard a lot of the headlines zoom into that. And that's very much there as a through line throughout, particularly the latter half of the performance. But it is part of this larger thing of just general competition within all these different levels over these different categories of what makes one better or worse, or higher or lower. And that's being done. And also, even within race itself, is every single layer is in every one of those layers. So race in America, we see that with Uncle Sam and the flag and what is ghetto, what is not ghetto. You see that in hip hop being really held up as being a art form that came out of the Black African American experience. And there being all this commentary of what it means and why it makes the statements it does because of that. And then within Drake, the argument, the feud with Drake himself, a lot of it, where it started with was Kendrick saying that Drake was someone who's not really Black, is what Kendrick said. And not because his mom happens to be Jewish, but because he didn't really grow up in Black culture. He doesn't really understand Black culture, but he uses it to get money and to be able to get commercial success, which is what Kendrick alleges. And so there's a whole racial element about where Drake even fits within the world of us, which is not like us, is about, to at one level, about Black people that have been enslaved, Black people that have tried to make a way out. And so all of that idea of competition on all those levels and trying to assert what is true, what is good, what is right through hip hop, that's where a lot of those themes start unfolding throughout the halftime show.
Yeah. I think we need to address some of this because you're right that, I mean, it was maybe the only narrative in the evening of the first takes on the halftime show were just puzzlement from, many parents texting their kids like, do you know what that was? But, as Kendrick did say, the revolution is about to be televised, but you picked the wrong guy and he's going to blow everything up. Drake, everyone honed in on the beef. Everyone wanted to say it was just the biggest diss track in history. And this idea of being better than, superior, and being in constant debate, I think it's very, very misunderstood in so many ways. And I think it became a marker for distaste among a lot of people. So the pettiness of using something as huge as the Super Bowl to settle game over a rap beef. And yet I think it's just misses the point entirely. And the fact that, he does Not Like Us Last, the fact that he teases it in the middle of the set, there's this kind of awareness to me that he knows it's going to be misunderstood. He has Uncle Sam approve of, the easier listening R&B songs where there's not really any rapping with SZA involved. Those, more like that. We need more of that. There you go. It's amazing to me how Kendrick prophetically anticipated the very critique that was going to happen. The struggle between, I think, rap and mainstream American culture, which he's also very well attuned to. You can listen to him talk about Geraldo on Damn as totally missing the point. And I think this idea of missing the point and choosing the wrong guy, turn the TV off. There's not just a struggle between Kendrick and Drake. It's the struggle between the author and the audience, rap culture, Black male rap culture in particular and mainstream culture. Thinking of the Super Bowl halftime show as a sort of, as you say, lean back, or as Jay-Z said, lean back, not lean in. It's just entertained me almost to the point of stupidity. And Kendrick is pushing on that so much. I would just love to hear what you think is going on, like with this incredibly strong reaction to the biggest diss track in the history of diss tracks.
Yeah, I think I don't know. There's so many layers to it. I mean,
I know.
There's this idea of, I don't know, people like to see blood, kind of this idea.
Yeah.
And Kendrick said that at some point of, I think it's on 616 in LA, which is one, he didn't release it widely, but I think it's on social media, I love peace, but war ready if the world ready to see you or want to see you bleed. Yeah, which part of it is. But there's an idea of almost this like gladiatorial thing. I think that's there. And
well, I mean, that's football. It's also the most violent of sports, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like
of popular ones that has such a wide audience. Yeah, totally.
The metaphor there is constantly a metaphor of war, violence,
exactly. So there's that whole element of it that's there. And just like the cult of celebrity and like, and people really identifying strongly and being on one team versus another and wanting to see people rise up, wanting to see people brought down. There's this kind of almost like eating popcorn and watching it. So there is this gladiatorial aspect of it that I think is why people often focus on it so much. And I think not able to see the nuance of, oh, they're saying this, but there's layers of why they're saying it. There's layers of what they're getting at. And when you only see just the two people going at it, you can overly focus on that and think, oh, maybe it's petty, maybe it's not, and debate it over them. But there's a lot of bigger things. Some things are about hip hop, some things are about identity and culture. And one of the things is the third thing that I mentioned about integrity was often what Kendrick, and artistry was there. Like, and I think people knew that Kendrick was going to be artistically savvy and just on top of it. But he really won on integrity at the end of the day, because he proved Drake to be someone that wasn't authentic and didn't have integrity towards Black people. And even more so, the thing that became the viral thing was his allegations about him allegedly, engaging in sexual misbehavior with girls that were young. And there's a whole layer to that when Kendrick really leaned into that, and there was other thing that had existed before on the internet that Kendrick was able to refer back to that had been there for 5 years before, that there's things out there that Kendrick was just then repeating out loud that had been there before. When this going on in the same year in which someone like P. Diddy gets brought down and arrested, where there is a lot more of this like awareness of like the unjust underbelly of what's going on, predatory behavior in some of these places of power. There is a whole aspect of it, of like I said, this competition, which is seeking for something more than just, oh, I individually win, or even my city wins or not. There's a question about society. And what do we do when there is evil that we can recognize is truly evil that should not be rewarded? Someone should not be declared the winner if they act in this way. We should not see them as the winner. We should not see them as being successful because if they act this way. There is potentially this room for them to change it and mature and grow up and repent and pay restitution and things like that. But if someone refuses to do that, they shouldn't be allowed to be viewed in a way where we look at them as an example or look up to them in a certain way. And a lot of if you listen to a lot of Kendrick actual work and what he's saying, a lot of it is this idea of, hey, somebody had to do this. That's actually the TV off. There's the last thing. And the hook there is like, yeah, got my foot up on the gas, but somebody got to do it. And the whole thing starts, one of the early lines off of Bodies, which is like the unreleased song, was like, everybody must be judged.
Oh, he says that?
He says that. It starts off with like reincarnated with love, my Gemini twin, which is about this idea. There's this dark side and a light side. There is this like evil and good. There's all this stuff that's in there. But he says that everyone must be judged, but this time God only favoring us. And so there is this idea, if you look at it from this moral standpoint, and I know I've definitely talked to a lot of women and heard a lot of women that heard that said at the end and were like, this is a good thing because someone needs to make sure that this kind of behavior is something that people realize, if you go into this, you will be found out. You will be paraded as an example of what not to be in front of everybody. And if even like that, this could be so discouraged, so spoken out again as heinous and evil that it should be there as a public service announcement at the Super Bowl. And so, yeah, this idea everyone will be judged, that to some extent it's presented as in what Kendrick is more than just this beef or this petting that he doesn't like about Drake or something like that. There's this idea of, hey, how you act, how America acts, how people behave, good or bad, whether it's black people, whether it's white people, how you act with one's life, how you act with one's kids, how men act with women, how society acts with people that are vulnerable. And yeah, how Drake acts with his fame and his power and his ability to still rap about. He had a response and he's talking about, oh, Kendrick wins, then people are going to be like dancing, twerking with a dictionary or something. And he's leading into his ignorance and stuff. And this idea of like, what do you do with that power? And you are going to be judged by that. I'm going to be Kendrick because I'm going to be judged by it. We're all going to be judged by God eventually from it. And all of that thing about competition, there's the idea of who declares the winner. And there's a whole layer in this that, well, ultimately God is the one that declares the winner because everyone will be judged. And that's all part of the competition.
Yeah. I mean, like I haven't heard the song yet because it just came out, but Drake's is leaning into basically the ignorance side of things. And he's just saying, I just came to have a good time. That's like his latest track. And the sort of moral seriousness that Kendrick brings to everything is incredible. It's astounding. And I think we can maintain like the sort of the alleged nature of the Drake stuff. And as you said, Kendrick's just repeating what was already out there. It's just amazing to see that level of moral seriousness, bringing something to the gladiator ring. I really think you're onto something with that the Super Bowl is the contemporary gladiator ring. I mean, we've got UFC as well, but not at the level of that the Super Bowl holds for people, where everyone wants to see blood, and Kendrick brings this moral seriousness, this spiritual clarity, and seems to always ever be raising this question: is it wickedness or weakness? You decide. He still leaves it up to the listener. Femi, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. We peeled back only a few layers of this onion, and I've just enjoyed the whole thing. I am so grateful to you, and I hope maybe you'll be willing to join me again sometime.
Yeah, it's great talking. Great conversation. Really appreciate the work that you've done to understand the show, a lot of Kendrick's work, everything going on. There's so many layers, but it's always great to talk to people that have been doing that work. And hopefully that does a service to all of us to think about these ideas. And definitely love the work that y'all done. Love the For the Life of the World. It's my favorite Alexander Schmemann book within the Orthodox tradition. And I love Miroslav Volf's work. Exclusion and Embrace was like one of the early books I read in college that was really influential for me. And in many ways, the whole battle with Drake and everything we talked about is a mirror for the discussion in Exclusion and Embrace. Everything about otherness and identity and excluding others or embracing them, all of that. There's so many layers. It's all in there.
Oh my gosh. Well, that's fantastic. Femi, I'm delighted to have met you. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan.
For the Life of the World is a production of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. This episode featured Femi Olutade. Production assistance by Alexa Rollo, Emily Brookfield, Zoe Halaban, Casey Barrett, and Macy Bridge. I'm Evan Rosa, and I edit and produce the show. For more information, visit us online at faith.yale.edu or lifeworthliving.yale.edu, where you can find all sorts of resources that help people envision and pursue lives worthy of our humanity. If this is the first episode that you've ever heard of ours, remember to hit subscribe in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss the next one. And to our loyal supporters and our faithful listeners, we would be delighted if you'd share this episode with a friend by either hitting the share button for this episode, sending it as a text or an email, or just bringing it up in wonderful, good old-fashioned in-person conversation. Thanks again for listening, friends. We'll be back with more soon.